So today I'm going to talk about matrix-matrix multiplication. And we are hopefully all familiar with matrix-matrix multiplication. Here is a pseudocode for a naive implementation. For I equals 0, I is to n, I plus plus. For j equals 0 to n, j plus plus. For k equals 0 to n, k plus plus. Cij equals Cij plus Aik into Bkj. This is a very common operation, matrix multiplication. It is used in many applications. It basically involves calculating the I comma jth element of C based on by iterating over K over the row of A and over the column of B. All right. So if I was to show this in a diagrammatic form, this would look something like the following. Let me just draw this. So let's say this is C. So if I want to calculate I comma jth element here of C, then let's say this is A. So this is C, this is A, and this is B. Then I go through the ith row and I go through the jth column and take a dot product of these two vectors. So I take the dot product of the ith row in A and the jth column in B. And that gives me one element in C. So this particular loop, if you look at it, is actually an order n cube loop because there are three nested loops, each of them iterating a variable from 0 to n. Also, in this implementation, I have made a simplification. I have not initialized Cij to 0. I'm assuming that initially, before this loop nest even starts, the values of C are all 0. So, for example, what I'm saying is I've not really done Cij equals 0 here, and that's on purpose, and we're going to understand why I'm not doing this. Just for now, we can assume that even before this loop nest starts, C has been initialized to 0, and so the execution of this 3-depth loop nest basically gives me a multiplication of A and B into C. All right, so I want to understand the performance of the loop that I just showed to you in the previous slide of the loop nest, which had 3 nested loops, and basically we're going to say that the performance will largely depend on the behavior of the caches. Recall that CPU has a cache and then there's main memory, and actually there's a cache hierarchy, but I'm basically simplifying the diagram here. There's L1, L2, L3 caches, but let's just say there's one cache and it has a best case latency of 1 cycle, and it has a grain size of 1 byte. So the CPU can basically access the cache at a byte granularity. I can just say that give me the byte at address 100 and it will just give me 1 byte. So that's what I mean by grain size. But when I look at the interface between cache to main memory, the latencies are almost 100x more and 100x slower between, let's say, L1, which is going to be accessed in a single cycle, versus main memory, which is going to take hundreds of cycles to access. Of course, this is the worst case latency. If it's between L3 and main memory, the factor may be anywhere between 10 and 100. But in the worst case, it can be 100 or 100 plus. And the grain size here is cache line. All right, so it's not a single byte. But if I want to get something from the main memory into the cache, the smallest grain that I can get in one go is basically one cache line, which is typically, let's say, 64 bytes. So why do we have a larger grain size between cache and main memory and a smaller grain size between CPU and cache? Well, it's just a matter of distance. It's something that's close to you, you can basically do more fine-grained access. The latencies are smaller. Something that's farther from you, you need to do, you want to get more things in a batch. It's not very different from retailer and wholesaler. You can get small things from your retail shop, but when you get something from the wholesale, you would typically want to get things in bulk because the latencies are higher. All right, so what are some characteristics of this cache hierarchy subsystem? First of all, this whole idea of using a cache line that's bigger than a single byte, larger grain size of, let's say, 64 bytes or larger, and some prefetching also. So in fact, at this interface between cache and main memory, there is some intelligence built into the hardware, which says that, oh, if there's been access of this type, then start prefetching addresses on that follow that, all right? So cache line and prefetching together, they are meant to exploit spatial locality. Spatial locality is the property of a program to access spatially closed locations close in time. So if I've been accessing, let's say, AI plus 1, AI plus 2, very likely I'm going to also access AI plus 3. And so some of this is going to get absorbed by the cache line size itself, because maybe all AI plus 1, AI plus 2 that are spatially closed are going to fit in a single cache line. So when I've brought AI into the cache, automatically AI plus 1, plus 2, plus 3 and so on also came into the cache, and that helped me with my spatial locality. And that's one of the big advantages of having a larger cache line. The other thing is prefetching. The intelligence built into the hardware can actually figure out that there's a stride pattern in which the program is accessing memory. So it probably will help if I just try to speculate and bring more stuff into the cache. Now there's an opportunity cost of doing this, but oftentimes hardware does this kind of thing and does this successfully, because programs do have predictable patterns, and if the prediction is correct, this is a win. And so both cache line and prefetching are meant to exploit spatial locality. And then the cache typically has some kind of replacement policy. For example, it may have an LRU replacement policy or a FIFO replacement policy. And these policies are meant to capture temporal locality, which means that things that have been accessed recently are going to likely be accessed in future shortly. All right. So this is the typical past equals future assumption that we make in computer systems. Something that has happened in past is also likely to happen in future. Something that has happened close in past will likely to happen close in future as well. And that is exactly the property of temporal locality. The other way to state the property of temporal locality is that there is low reuse distance. The distance between two uses of the same location is small. And that is the assumption of temporal locality, typically small, or statistically speaking, it is small. So this is the assumption of low reuse distance. The reuse of the same location, the distance between the two uses or reuses of the same location are typically small. And if that is true, then the program exhibits temporal locality. And if the program exhibits temporal locality to a certain degree, the hardware is designed to exploit that temporal locality using the cache replacement policies such as LRU or first in first out, FIFO. All right, so let's understand in this context of the caching hierarchy, the implementation of the matrix multiplication that I showed you in the first slide and its performance. So once again, it's a triple nest for I from 0 to n, j from 0 to n, k from 0 to n, Cij equals Cij plus Ik star Bkj. And this last loop here is basically implementing a dot product, right? Dot product between the ith row in A and the jth column in B. Now, one thing to notice here is that in this last nest here, Cij is pretty much not, the address of Cij is pretty much not getting changed. And so what I can do is I can just register allocate Cij. In fact, even the value is not going to get, assuming that Cij, C, A and B are distinct memory regions. So C does not overlap with A and C does not overlap with B and so on. Then I can just basically register allocate Cij and in fact rewrite this code such that this Cij I basically say R, and then I say R, and then at the very end I can just say Cij equals R. All right, and at the beginning of the loop I can say R equals Cij. And this is basically nothing but register allocation of Cij. And I can do this I can assume that C and A do not alias or cannot point to C. No location in C can point to the same location as some location in A or some location in B. Notice that if it was possible for C and A or C and B to overlap, then it is not correct to register allocate Cij in this particular loop. All right. So what are the memory accesses in this inner loop, which is basically the loop that's going to get, the body of this loop is basically going to get executed the most often, most with highest frequency. And so in this register R is just going to take less than a cycle to access, because this register is just inside the CPU. But if I look at AIK and BKJ, it does not make sense to basically register allocate these locations, because in this particular loop it's just every location is being accessed only once, and so I'll have to pay memory accesses to access these locations. Notice that for Cij, I just had to have one memory access for the entire loop. But for Aik and Bkj, I need one memory access for every iteration of the loop. Now, but even though there are different, both A and B look symmetric in terms of the number of memory accesses that they make per iteration of the loop, the access pattern that they exhibit in the memory is actually very different. Aik basically iterates on the second argument. So for example, the first access is AI0, the second access is AI1, third access is AI2, and so on. And assuming that the first argument here, I, is the row argument, and the second argument is the column argument, and assuming that the array was laid out in row major form, then AI0, AI1, AI2 are basically consecutive locations in memory. In other words, they have consecutive addresses. On the other hand, if I look at Bkj, then the accesses in the inner loop are going to be B0j, B1j, B2j, and so on. And if it is a row major layout for the B array, then this is basically going all the way across a row to get to the second element. So B0j and B1j are really far apart in the memory address space. B0j, there are n elements between B0j and B1j, whereas there is only one element between AI0 and AI1. Okay, so assuming row major memory layout, of course I can, if I used a column major memory layout, the argument would flip. In that case, B would have spatial locality and A would not have spatial locality. But assuming, I'm just going to pick one of them, it doesn't matter, without loss of generality. Assume that the memory layout is row major, then AIK's accesses are likely to be cache hits, because AIK minus 1 would have been very likely accessed recently, and because AIK minus 1 was accessed recently, the whole cache line must have been present in the cache, and very likely, or perhaps because of prefetching, and so there would be spatial locality, and so most of these accesses for AIK would be cache hits. On the other hand, if I look at BKJ, then these will likely be cache misses, because the recent access would have been to BK minus 1J. And BK minus 1J is very far from BKJ because it's a row major layout. And so BK minus J is a significant distance away, and it does not fit in the same cache line of say 64 bytes. And so this exhibits a very high reuse distance. So the first access here, AIK, exhibits low reuse distance, has good spatial locality. BKJ has high reuse distance and low spatial locality. AIK has high spatial locality, BKJ has low spatial locality, assuming row major memory layout. So what are the total number of misses that this loop is going to have? If I look, basically this particular statement here is going to be executing n cube times, of which Cij is going to be register allocated. AIK is going to be mostly cache hit, sometimes cache miss, and BKJ is going to be almost always a cache miss. So the number of misses that I'm going to have is going to be order n cube, and that's going to be dominated by the accesses to B and not to either C or A. And so BKJ is going to be my performance bottleneck. The access to BKJ is going to be my performance bottleneck in this particular loop, because it's going to be a likely miss on each iteration. Recall that a miss is almost 100x slower than a hit, and so this is basically going to be the most significant performance drag in our code. So to see this diagrammatically, if I was to basically compute the value of Cij marked by this X, then I iterate over the ith row of A using K and the jth column of B using K. When I iterate over the ith row of A, it has very high spatial locality, assuming row major memory layout, because all these consecutive locations that I'm accessing are likely to be close in address space of the physical memory, and so they're going to fit in the same cache line, or they're going to benefit from prefetching. On the other hand, these accesses are really far, because they have all this between this access and the next access. There are all these addresses that are marked with the yellow pen here, which is a large distance away, and so there is very little spatial locality or no spatial locality in the accesses to B. In other words, the reuse distance in A is 1, because we basically reuse the same cache line again, while the reuse distance at the cache line granularity for B is n, because I reuse the same cache line only after I have done n accesses. Okay, or actually maybe I don't have any reuse at all. Okay, so in other words, this one has low reuse distance compared when I'm talking about cache line granularity, and this one has very high reuse distance or no n or even higher. Okay, all right. So if cache has C cache lines, what is the number of misses for one iteration of the outer loop? So now let's try to make this slightly more nuanced and say that, let's say C, the cache has some finite size, and let's say it has C cache lines. Recall that the cache basically transacts in the granularity of cache lines, and so we're going to assume that there are C cache lines. So what is the number of misses for one iteration of the outer loop? So what is the number of iterations for one iteration of the outer loop? It is order n square. We said order n cube for the entire loop nest, but if I just take one iteration of the outer loop, that's going to be all the iterations of the inner loops, the two inner loops and nested loops, and that's going to be order n square. And so that has basically what we're going to get it that B has least locality, and that needs n square accesses. And so in the worst case, each of those accesses is going to be a miss. None of those accesses is going to be available in the cache that has C cache lines. And so in the worst case, I'm going to get order n square misses. However, there's a best case, and the best case here is that, let's say C columns of B fit in cache. So let's say, starting from this, the C columns here actually fit in cache, which basically means n should have been a very small number, because that basically means that C into n fits in C cache lines, right? So basically that means that the number of cache lines is, the n is somehow smaller than the number of cache lines or something like that. And just in case that happens, then this would be the best case, because then what will happen is that once I go through this column, then I go to the next column, j plus 1, and now j plus 1's and columns entries are going to be available in the cache, because the entire column, the C columns could fit in the cache, and so the next C columns are already in the cache. By the time I start with j plus 1th column, the entries of all the j plus 1 column are already in the cache, because when I brought the entries of jth column, the cache lines came into the cache, and because those cache lines fit in the cache, when I start doing j plus 1 column, I'm able to reuse those available cache lines in the cache. And so that's the best case, when C columns of B fit in the cache. The worst case is when less than equal to 1 columns of B fit in the cache. And the worst case is going to be the common case. If the arrays are big, then less than equal to 1 column, because 1 column basically means n elements, and if n is some large number, let's say million or something like that, then that's not going to fit in the cache, and so that's the worst case. But if n is, let's say, small, let's say n is 100 or something like that, then maybe the C columns can fit in the cache, and then I would have better answers. And so in this case, in the best case, I can expect n square by C misses, because every time I go through a column, I only need to fetch the first column of a C-sized area. So for example, this is size C. So of this, I need to only fetch the first one, and all the others are going to be available. And so because of that, I'll have n square by C misses in the best case, and n square misses in the worst case, as we discussed earlier. So in the worst case, I'll have order n square misses. In the best case, I'll have n square by C misses. Now that's for one iteration of the outer loop of this program. So in other words, for one iteration of the outer loop, the number of misses that I can experience is anywhere between n square by C and n square, depending on the size of these arrays. One can also argue that this also depends on the cache replacement policy. If the cache replacement policy is somehow very smart and it's able to figure out that this something should be retained in the cache and things like that, then it's possible that we get something which is less than n square, even when n was bigger. And so the precise answer is that the number of misses will be somewhere between n square by C and n square. Best case is n square by C, worst case is n square, and typically we'll have some number which is in the middle of these two values. So that's for one iteration of the outer loop. What about for n iterations of the outer loop, which means the entire loop nest? For n iterations of the outer loop, once again, the worst case is just multiply n square by n, because for every iteration of the outer loop, I basically have a fresh set of n square misses, and so that's n cube, and that's basically because the arrays just don't fit in the cache. However, in the best case now, I still have n square by c, and here I'm going to, the reason I get n square by c and not n cube by c is because the best case is when the entire b fits in the cache, and if the entire b fits in the cache, then I basically just need to bring b, for one inner loop iteration, I just need to bring b once into the cache, and that's going to take n square by c cache misses, because the size of b is n square, and so I get n square by c cache misses, because in one cache miss I get c elements in one go, and so n square by c cache misses when entire b fits in the cache, and n cube misses when less than equal to one column of b fits in the cache. And so for n iterations of the outer loop, I'm going to experience anywhere between n square by c and n cube misses in this loop nest. Okay, so now that we have discussed how to analyze the number of misses for that particular code, let's also see how one would go about parallelizing that particular code. And let's assume that I have p processors in my system. So one nice strategy is row by row parallelization. I just take the first n by p iterations of the outer loop and give it to first processor, the next n by p to the second processor, the third n by p to the third processor, and so on, and the last n by p to the last processor. And this is called row by row parallelization. Do n by p outer loop iterations for each processor. And if I do that, then worst case number of cache misses for n by p outer loop iterations is going to be, we know that for one iteration it's n square. This is the analysis we did earlier. We just multiply by that with the number of loop iterations for that particular processor. So per processor, I will have n by p into n square cache misses. And so each of these processors is going to have cache misses. Each of these processors in the worst case would have n cube by p cache misses, even with parallelization. So what is the total number of cache misses across all processors? Well, I just multiply that by p, and so p into n by p. So what is the total number of cache misses across all processors? Well, I just multiply that by p. So p into n by p into n square, and that just gives me n cube. So the worst case number of cache misses for n by p outer loop iterations is n cube by p, but total number of cache misses across all processors is still n cube. You may say, oh, but these cache misses are going to be served in parallel, and that's largely true. However, recall that the architecture of the hardware is a little bit more complex, and there is a single main memory that has many memory banks, so there is some parallelism. But at the end of the day, all these cache misses are going to come to the main memory. And so we are basically limited by the parallelism in the main memory and not in the parallelism in the CPU. So even if I have, let's say, 1000 CPUs, all these cache misses are going to go to the main memory. And if the main memory does not have enough parallelism, in the worst case, let's say the main memory can only serve one miss at a time. In that case, all the n cube misses across all the processors are going to get bottlenecked at the main memory, and our program is not going to be any faster, even though we are running the program on parallelizing the program on p different processors. Okay, typically main memory has some amount of parallelism built in through multiple parallel channels and banks and things like that, and it does give you some parallelism, but that parallelism is not as high as the amount of parallelism that we see at the CPU level or core level. You can have machines that have hundreds of cores, but main memory would not have that many channels. And so even though in my matrix multiplication example, if I do row by row parallelism, I would still be bottlenecked by the main memory, which is going to serve all my cache misses. So this was just some motivation to understand how to reason about the performance of code that accesses memory and goes through the cache hierarchy. In the subsequent lectures, we're going to look at techniques to manage this this situation in a better way, so that we can exploit the cache hierarchy in a better way for our desired logic that we want to implement, such as matrix multiplication.